Bing bong. We are live with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast. But first, for those listening in on Fountain or any of the podcasting 2.0 apps, I really appreciate those who have sent me boosts. And I'm going to read a couple of the boosts from the last episode. So Mark Carverna, I'm not sure. Mark over NA maybe is how you say it. He says, merge your customer, not me. And he also said with the Ethereum merge, it essentially has copied the traditional financial system, which I agree with 100%. And then Bobo Tummy said great content. So I appreciate those boosts. And please keep them coming in. I'm working really hard on these podcasts. I'm bringing on great guests and hopefully bringing on some content to keep you guys coming back. So let me know what you think on those and leave me some reviews on wherever you're listening to podcasts. But I've got a very, very special guest. I've got Jaime Garcia, who is probably one of the most well-versed in the Bitcoin space when it comes to everything El Salvador. So Jaime, how you doing today?
Hey, Brandon, thanks for having me. I'm doing well. And yeah, super excited to contribute in whatever way I can. So I wouldn't consider myself as an expert. I keep telling everybody I'm a plebeian, just like most Bitcoiners. And, I just have a regular 9-to-5 job. I pay my bills and if there's a little bit extra at the end of the month, I stack. But otherwise, my main jobs in life are being a good father and a husband.
That's awesome stuff, man. And that's great. And that's the great thing about Bitcoin is I feel like almost everybody has like a 9-to-5 job and is just contributing to Bitcoin, the space, in any way they can on the side. So let's take it back. How did you find Bitcoin and what kind of got you started in this whole Bitcoin world?
Yeah, I've heard about Bitcoin for a little while now. Like we, being in a bit of this industry, I was a web designer for a large part of my professional life. Always being on top of everything that's going on in technology. I heard of Bitcoin, way back in the day. But, regretfully, I was one of those people who always said that they would look into it after and never did. And really, it was just when Bukele announced that he was going to run for president and he was blocked. And then he tweeted that, that he would use Bitcoin. That's back in 2017. That's when I was like, wait, what is this guy saying? Who is this guy? And so I had another opportunity to look into it and never did. I was more kind of intrigued by like what he was saying than by Bitcoin itself. And then but yeah, it was in 2021. I'm class of 2021 when they made the announcement that it was going to become legal tender. My dad came up to me and he's like, what is this all about? Can you figure it out for me? Like, and I said, yeah, sure. So I went down the rabbit hole, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. I was lucky enough to stumble upon people who pointed me the right way. And I'm proud to say that I never delved into, shit goings. So, yeah, I've been a maxi from day one, which is, I'm really super fortunate about it. And yeah, that's kind of how I entered into the space. And I was always sort of lurking in the background, just nodding my head, going to do more research about it until people started weighing in about El Salvador this, El Salvador that, the other thing. And I'm like, wait, that's not true. We're like, that's not quite correct. And so, in Twitter Spaces, I started to gather the courage to speak up and just sort of say my piece, and not trying to convince anybody or anything. about it, but just provide a Salvadoran perspective. And like Salvadorians, we most of us speak Spanish, and uh, you know that's our first language, and so especially in Twitter Spaces, there aren't many English speaking Salvadorians that might intervene, and so I almost felt like, even though I'm also a Canadian, I felt it was my duty to speak up and sort of at least share my perspective, right? So
Yeah, and I always enjoy when you come into the Twitter Spaces and talk a lot about, El Salvador, what's going on there, and I always appreciate your perspective. And I do really enjoy your articles as well. You've written for a couple for Bitcoin Magazine. So, how did you kind of stumble upon that, and how have those articles been received? Because you've written a couple, articles on El Salvador, and you actually wrote your last one about Bukele's potential re-election, which we'll get into in a second. But how overall has that been received, and how has that opportunity kind of, I guess, opened some doors for you?
yeah, my regular 9 to 5 job, I lead a small team of researchers, and we based a lot of our findings for my employer based on data. We're if we're not sure or we're not certain about something, then we make our best estimates, right? But we base everything on data, and I think that's forced me to become a better writer. I'm not saying that I'm a good writer, but a better writer than I used to be, especially when you are presenting complex issues to an audience that may not be familiar with it and may not even care. Like like the type of reports that I write, people are wanting to make big time decisions on. They want to know the 3 or 4 things that they should know about to move forward, and they want to know that I've done my due diligence in making that research, and that it's solid, that there's a sound methodology, and so on. So I think that I had like a natural skill there, and I don't even know how it came about. I think like I reached out to there was just a lot of FUD, and I'm like, oh man, I feel like I should write something, and I was gonna write something on Medium, and I think I was in a space, and somebody said, "Hey, you should talk to like so and so over at Bitcoin Magazine. Maybe they'll publish that." Because I was ready to like hit publish on Medium, and then and so then I reached out to the guys over at Bitcoin Magazine, and they were really cool actually, because like I would say that like if you are an aspiring writer, if you just want to get something off your chest, like reach out to Bitcoin Magazine or whoever, like even publish it yourself, right? And but those guys were really good, because like I mean, like again, I'm just a dude, and they're like, yeah, let's see what you got, give us a proposal about what you want to write. So I send them a bit of an outline. They took a look at it. They're like, this is cool. Okay, let's see what you got. I wrote something. They were pretty happy with it. They're like, let's see how it does. And so I got good feedback on Twitter. I got good feedback on other channels. And then they themselves said like, yeah, it's getting good engagement, so good job. If you come up with another idea, then let us know. So I came up with another idea. Then they've asked me to write a couple things as well, and so I'm up to 5 articles now. So and yeah, like I'm having a lot of fun with it. I think that sometimes you can't say everything that you need to say in a space, or even in a podcast as an invited guest. So I think that the writing for me is a bit of a channel, because then like I get it off my chest. I can sleep better, rest easy, and say like at least it's out there, right? And people can, and then people I like the engagement afterwards, because people will be like, everything you say is bullshit, I disagree with you, and that's fine. Or hey, this is my favorite. Not even like I agree with you because, okay, yeah, sure, cool. But I've learned something new. And for me, like, that's so rewarding. That's that's a bit of a runner's high, like when somebody tells me I've learned something new, I'm like, yes, hallelujah. Like, I mean, that's, a lot of people want to find purpose in life. I don't think we all have like one purpose, but, definitely many purposes. And like one of my many purposes in life is to teach others, right? In my personal life, I love coaching soccer. I've got many certifications and I've done well in my life. That's something that I don't share very often, but I do well. My teams win championships, they lose games, but the most rewarding thing about that is when kids learn, when I teach them and they learn and they enjoy the game, right? So for me, writing is the same. It's like I write it, I get it off my chest, people read it, and if they learn, like, to me, that's 110%. Like, I love that.
That's awesome, man. That is, yeah, and your works are absolutely great. And yeah, I mean, feel free to spit whatever you want here. I mean, no holding back, of course. But yeah, I mean, let's get into this last article. So you dove into the potential of Bukele getting reelected, and I know that that's not a normal occurrence. In fact, on the Constitution of El Salvador, I think it says that you cannot be you kind of have to jump through some loops and bounds in order to get reelected. So why don't you go into some of that and overall, what the process is in order for Bukele to potentially get reelected?
Sure. Yeah. And, I'd encourage everybody to read the article because it'll have a lot of the details and I actually source a lot of what I'm saying. Right. But, I was one of those people who definitely thought that under the Salvadoran Constitution, only a single 5-year term was possible. Now, some people may disagree, and they still believe that's the case. But what happened was, and even Bukele himself had gone on record saying it's a 5-year term. I'm not going to seek reelection. And what many people thought was that he was actually going to change the Constitution, which in my article I point out that it's almost impossible for him to change the Constitution in time for him to get reelected, right? And so, but what happened was that last year in 2021, there were legislative assembly elections. So that's basically like in the U.S. it's like Congress or Senate elections, right? And El Salvador doesn't have a Senate; it just has like the equivalent of a Congress, and that's it, right? So you have your executive power, which is the president. You have your legislative power, which is kind of like the Congress, and of course you have the third pillar, which is your judicial system, right? So what happened was that there was elections for the Legislative Assembly, and a candidate, her name is Nancy Martinez. She was running for the constituency of San Salvador, and like in any normal election, candidates kind of promote themselves and they do the media rounds, and Nancy was interviewed by a local newspaper, as a digital newspaper, so El Mundo. And so El Mundo asked Nancy series of questions. One of those questions is like, Nancy, you know if there was a bid for Nayib Bukele re-election, would you support President Bukele to get reelected? So Nancy, of course, answers, "Well, of course, yes, I will support him. Like, look what he's done. We're very happy. And I should point out that Nancy's not running for President Bukele's party, so which his party's New Ideas, right? Um, and Bukele himself, when he got elected, didn't get elected under New Ideas because the electoral authority actually disqualified him from running with that party. So he ran for another party called Ghana, right? The Great National Alliance, right? So this candidate is running for the Great National Alliance, which is kind of like a coalition member of the people that support him, right? So she says that, and about a few weeks later, a constitutional lawyer actually says, well, Nancy has violated the Constitution by promoting the re-election of the president, right? And he cites Article 72.4, which is kind of where it actually says that, anybody who basically promotes the re-election of the president, it loses their citizens' rights. So words matter, right? And the Constitution is basically a document with a lot of words, right? The re-election of the president, right? Okay, so, and they lose their citizen rights, right? So then the Supreme Court takes this case, looks at it, and it's a very serious case, because if they're going to take people's constitutional or citizenship rights away, it's it not only set the precedent for what's going to happen into the future, but you're putting this individual out of their rights, right? And so this guy, his name is I believe his name is I want to say Ernesto Anaya. I can't remember quite his name, but his last name is Anaya. So this Anaya character, Enrique Anaya, that's his name. Yeah. So he's a Bukele detractor for sure. Like that's he's been known to not like Bukele or anything he stands for. So he has a long track record of putting lawsuits and charges against anything he does, constitutional charges. So this is one more to add to the pile. So what he was trying to do is actually disqualify or discourage this lady Nancy Martinez from running in the election, so that it would be easier for one of the candidates he was supporting for the traditional parties to get in. So the Supreme Court comes back and says, well, no, we're not going to disqualify her. She can still run, but if we do find that she's in violation of the Constitution, if she is successful in her bid, we're going to take away her, her rights and her office if we find her guilty. And so all this kind of background leads the constitutional chamber of the Supreme Court to look at the case and say, if we take her rights, it's a very serious thing. So we got to be very thorough in looking at all of this, right? What does it mean? So they decide, first of all, the evidence that Enrique Anaya has put forward lacks objectivity and it lacks credibility. So, okay, so strike one. Then they go into it and they say, okay, but, are we going to jail anybody who says, yes, let's reelect the president, especially if, people feel that he's doing a good job? It may be a perfectly reasonable thing for a citizen to say. And not every citizen is aware that, well, they may be aware that or they have the perception that it's one term. They may not be aware that this is actually a penalty to actually just say that, right? So then they look at it and say, well, no, and we guarantee free speech, and any of the other articles that in the Constitution that basically go against that are invalid. People can express their desires, even if they're not allowed by the Constitution, without fear of, being jailed. Now, let's think about this, for example, right, where a lot of people think, well, El Salvador is like this dictatorship and it's oppressive, and it's like, well, what the court is saying here is like, we don't want to go down this road of El Salvador being anti-free speech and people can't actually say what they feel. So yeah, this is perfectly okay to say. But then, like, Supreme Courts often in any country, they go deep into things because they gotta like look everything from every angle, and they say, but like, why would she say that? Like, and like, what does the, because they have to evaluate this, right? Like, is there even a possibility that there is a re-election, that the president can be reelected? And they come to this conclusion. They said no. In fact, the Constitution says that the president cannot be reelected. That is very clear. The president cannot be reelected, and the president cannot remain beyond 1 day, not 1 day beyond their term, right? But they said, if the president steps down from the presidency and runs as a candidate, they can get elected for a second term. So, and that's what's key about it, is that the term re-election doesn't really come into the whole equation, because they have to step down and not be re-elected as the president. They have to like basically leave their position, not have any influence, and become almost like a citizen again, right? And so in Article 72.1, it sets out the criteria for who can be a candidate. And this is where they get it from. Well, who can be a candidate? Well, actually, it's who cannot be a candidate, right? It's not who can be a candidate, who cannot be a candidate. Those who have served in the immediate previous term, right? So that means not the current term, which Nayib Bukele is serving, but the immediately previous term. That means the term before. So, for example, the previous president, Sanchez Seren, he wouldn't be able to serve because he was president in the immediate previous term. But the current term, that's where Bukele is, he can serve, but he can't be a candidate as a president. So, because that's right there in the law. So the other stipulation is that you can't be president in the 6 months preceding the new term, right? So, and that's kind of where the opportunity or the path to a second term for Bukele is revealed. And it's that he can seek a permission from the Legislative Assembly to exonerate him from the position so that he can run just a regular citizen without the advantage of incumbency or using the resources of the state to gain an advantage over any other candidate. I talked to a constitutional expert. His name is Arturo. And the thing is, like, we all have two last names in El Salvador because we like there's so many Martinez and so many Fernandez that you have to go with two names to identify which Martinez and Fernandez. So Arturo Mendez Azar, he was one of the authors of the so I was like wondering, it's like, who can tell me, like, who can break this down for me? So I went straight to this source, one of the authors of the Constitution of 1983, which is the one that that is currently in force. And at the time, Mendez Azar, he was the Minister of Justice, and actually one of the people in the working team for drafting a new constitution for El Salvador. And he confirms this. He says, look, yeah, this is true. And so I asked him, well, if because I'm skeptical. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And so it's like, look, I mean, here's the problem. He says, people, they need to read. They need to read the document. Okay, points for reading. points for reading and actually knowing what the terms that are in a document mean. The immediately previous term is not the current term, it's the one before. And 6 months before the new term is 6 months before the new term, which means that if the president needs to step down to run as a civilian, not in the office, the Constitution allows for that. And so I said, that seems like like little maneuvering, little loophole. And he's like, that's not what it is. He said, look, we made some errors in drafting the last Constitution. We'll admit that, but this was not one of them. This was quite intentional. Our intention was not make it difficult to seek a second mandate. Our intention was to make it difficult for people who didn't deserve a second mandate to get a second mandate. And he said to me, think about this. Of all the presidents that we've had since the last Constitution, which one would go to the people, to the People's Legislative Assembly, and ask for an exoneration to leave office, to leave office 6 months early, okay, and to expose yourself and risk not winning to run again for that chance, right? To run again. You would have to have a lot of confidence. You'd have to have basically, the confidence of the people to be able to do that, right? And so Ernesto says Arturo, says to me, that's what he needs to do. He needs to go to the assembly, seek this permit, then he steps down, then he can run. And the 6 months we put in there specifically for that, so that no one in that position of president can have the advantage of the state to promote propaganda or to do special social programs right before or anything like that. They would have to run on the record previous to that, and they would have to do it and seek the mandate from the people. And the thing is that it's not a re-election, and it's not automatic, and it's not immediate, because now there's a gap. There's alternability. Either the vice president or a delegate from the assembly that is assigned by the assembly serves as a president. And so, you have alternability there because somebody else is serving. But also alternability, according to the ruling, comes in through the people of El Salvador, through a free election process, having the choice to choose any of the candidates who put their name forward, and having the choice that if Bukele has not done a good job or has not won the confidence of the people, that he can be voted out as well. Not voted out, because technically at that point he's not the president, but you know what I'm saying, he can't be in there for a second term. So then I read the ruling from start to finish. Not easy, man. I'm not a constitutional expert, and I know why most people don't read these documents. They're hard, they're boring. It took me 45 minutes to read it once, and I read it 3 times over the last 5 weeks. Because, by the way, this ruling has been in place since last September. So, we've kind of known that this was going to happen anyway. But when you read it, it basically, there's one point in there, and it strictly prohibits a third term, because under the document, there's absolutely no possibility that you could seek a third term. Say, for example, Bukele gets in the next one, he could not run on the one after that, because then he would have been president in the immediate previous term. And then some people said, well, he took a gap of 6 months in there, like that, that. And so that's the loophole. And basically it's not, because the term is for 5 years. The term is for 5 years. And if you are either part of it for more than 6 months or more, you qualify as being part of that term. So that loophole supposedly is closed for a third term, and they prohibit it on there. So you would only get one more chance if he does that. But and Mendes Azahar was emphatic with me. It's like, I don't like it when people, and this is the one of the guys that wrote it. He's like, I don't like it when people say re-election of the president, because that is actually forbidden. That's actually forbidden. It's the election of Nayib Bukele for a second term once he is civilian, once he doesn't have the privilege of that position anymore. Like, you basically, a lot of people in El Salvador are very religious. They use a lot of religious metaphors, but he uses his metaphors like he comes down, as he comes down from from having this superior authority and becomes one of the herd, and he has to seek that position again from the herd and not from the position of power, right? So and he said it's a humbling process to step down to be one of the herd, and then try to seek that confidence again. I know I took a really long time to go through that, but I just felt that it was worthwhile explaining the timeline of how it came to be to that.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And I agree with you 100%. And yeah, if everybody, should definitely check out your article. You put in a lot of work for it, obviously, and you're very well versed in the subject. So I appreciate you going through all of that. It was great. But I want to ask your opinion. It's been about a year since Bitcoin has become legal tender. And obviously, Bukele has done a lot of things outside of making Bitcoin legal tender. And it's a very humbling thing, like you said, to kind of step down. So, it also takes a lot of confidence to kind of make a move like this. So, I mean, how is he being received in El Salvador? And what's your overall opinion of Bukele and, his time as president of El Salvador?
Well, people like him. There's no doubt about that. Even his opposition admits that. His critics, acknowledge that. They said, like, I listened to one of the spaces that of his opposition. They were trying to organize. They were deflated. They were like, "Oh, this is horrible." They said, like, because, well, everybody likes him. Everybody likes him, and and then there's this very famous lawyer from El Salvador there. She was on there. She's very influential among that group. And she says, we have an education problem in this country. And that's why we are where we are. First thing that I thought is, like, man, you guys have had, like, what, 40 years to address this education problem, and now that things aren't going your way, that now it matters, right? Okay, sure, I acknowledge that. We have an education problem. It's like, and she's like, the people are so dumb, she says. Like, the people of El Salvador are so dumb that they're going to reelect him again because they think that everything he's doing is amazing. And they're so dumb that, whatever he tells them, they listen, and he's just going to get elected again. And oh my God, it's just terrible. We've failed ourselves because our people are just so ignorant. And the whole time I'm thinking, lady, you guys are in a jam. And the first thing you do is blame the people who are supposed to get you elected. And you tell them that they're dumb. And this is how you think that you're going to form a coalition that is going to vote for you, by telling them that they're morons and because they believe anything. Look, I've heard this and I don't exactly believe in it, but I've heard it said many times, and it's like, people deserve the government that they vote for, right? And it's like, well, I mean, and if it's so dire for people, if it's so bad, then they deserve it. The reality is that people like Bukele because they're seeing results. Bread and butter issues. Bitcoin doesn't even come close to being one of them. The most important issue in El Salvador, and the reason why he's going to win, is because security is better. If that starts to falter from now until the next election, that's when the other party will have a chance, but not necessarily because things are going badly, but because they have to actually offer a better solution, right? That's why people like him, because he's actually addressing the number one concern for people. People aren't free if every day they have to worry about being shaken down, if they're worried about getting killed, if they're worried about losing a relative, or getting hurt from somebody else, right? And criminality, really. And he's addressing that issue. People feel it, people say it. I hear it every day from normal people. So when they form their spaces and they start insulting the population, it's like, guys, you're doing it to yourself. Because I do acknowledge that a good strong opposition is often a good thing in a democratic society. But they're not very smart for claiming that they are the intelligentsia and smart, and that they're the educated ones. They do themselves disservice, and this is why he enjoys a 95% approval. And I just want to make something clear. I'm not promoting Bukele, okay? I think some folks at Bitcoin Magazine told me, hey, listen, just be careful, because they think you're a paid shill for Bukele. I can categorically say no. And if they came to me and they said, like, look, keep writing and keep going on podcasts to talk positively about Bukele, I would absolutely say no, and I would tell you guys all about it. It's like, oh, these are the dirty tricks that they're pulling. Now, I've had plenty of criticism for the Bukele government. They other than security, there's a lot of garbage in the street. There's a huge garbage problem in the street that they need to address. Now, not just they alone. I think us as Salvador need to take some accountability for that. Traffic problems. They're doing well in infrastructure. I'll give them that much. Okay, but we have a big health problem. Okay, and not necessarily the health infrastructure with the hospitals or whatever, but we are sadly we have so many delicious dishes in El Salvador. Amazing, not often healthy for you. Okay. We need to better educate ourselves about the foods that we're eating and what we're consuming, so we have a healthy population. So there's a lot of things that this government needs to do, right? But they're addressing the most important issues. You can't address them all at once. And so they're being strategic about what they do, and they're doing that well, and that's why he's popular. Plus, the opposition doesn't do them any favors. So.
Well, there is a lot of critics out there, and I actually saw you got in a little bit of a Twitter spat today with Alex Gladstein, because he tweeted, on Bukele, the positives being Bitcoin adoption, telling off the IMF, volcano mining, stranded energy bonds, tourism up. But the negatives were mass arrests without warrants, detaining tens of thousands without charge, suspending civil liberties, defying Constitution to extend power, and spying on dissidents. And yeah, you kind of went back and forth with him on there. And, it seems like he's using some intense tactics to kind of combat the gang violence. So what do you kind of have to say to the critics there where he's using these tactics? Because, I guess I'll get into my opinion after you kind of go on the riff and everything.
Sure. There. Yeah. So I just want to say that, I like Alex, and I think that we are in alignment on a lot of things. There are some key things that he does not align with me, and that's okay. We don't all have to think the same way. I think the role that he plays in challenging authority is a good one. But my main argument, and I won't say anything else about Alex now because he's not here to defend his viewpoint. But my statement that would stand alone is this is like you have to start somewhere, right? You have to start somewhere, and you have to address that one issue that is the most important for people. And if the way that we envision a liberal democracy with full freedoms is a very well idealistic society. El Salvador is far from that. We've had a very bloody, a very oppressive history, and we have resourceful, entrepreneurial, ingenious people. We actually have the first Salvadorian astronaut going into space. We're very proud of him, and we want to celebrate our successes. But as a society, we've been oppressed. And I'm not talking about being oppressed like, oh man, like we're because part of our problem is that victim mentality. And what happens is that when you move from having a victim mentality to having a growth mentality, you're going to have a lot of people pulling you back saying, no, it's way better to be a victim. It's way better to get handouts. It's way, it's way better to, have these, collectivist ideals, than take a risk and, rely on the markets and on competition, and which, I'm not saying crony capitalism. I'm saying true free market where people can thrive, right? And so, but we're not there yet. We got to get there. I often use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where at the bottom of the pyramid you have like air, water, food. Like that's where we are. Okay. Then it comes like shelter, security. That's where we are. Then we can have, love, relationships, all of that, right? And then we get to like aspirations, professional goals. And then at the top of the pyramid is like, well, I can run for president, right? Some folks think that we are at the top of the pyramid. We got to get there. We got to get there. Okay. The people that are being put in jail are not nice people. If they were, crime would have stayed at the same level, but it's not. It's gone down massively and people feel secure. Okay. I will say this much. A lot of young men mostly join gangs because of the lack of opportunity. I don't like and I hope that the majority of them can rehabilitate themselves back into a productive member and a compassionate member of Salvadoran society into the future. Human rights are very important to me, but we're not there yet. Okay. And so the people who created this problem, well, first of all, the Bill Clinton administration, by sending a lot of the East LA migrants that exported the gang war to El Salvador, right? And full disclosure, I'm an LA Dodgers fan, so but that's where it came from, right? And then the FMLN and Arena and all those other parties that were accomplices to the gangs flourishing in that environment, where it did not provide opportunities to young men to be productive, to feel proud of their country, to feel like to have an opportunity, right? We had a chance to fix it, and we blew it because they were ransacking the country. And that's what I need the human rights activists to know. Okay? Now somebody has to have the courage to clean up that mess. You don't want young people in jail. It comes at a cost. It's not free to put them in there and feed them and all of that, right? Now, having said that, now that they're there, there's a program for them to build desks for the schools, to farm, to create their own food, because we can't be shipping and giving them all this food. So they're going to be productive members and create their own sustenance within jails. There's a program called Zero Idleness, it's called, and that's already implemented in the jail. So they're not just there sitting and getting beat up like it's shown on CNN and all these other news organizations. So the whole story is not being told, but that's okay. That's okay. I know, right? Are there abuses by one-off police members that probably I will acknowledge that. Just like Floyd, or excuse me, I don't know my American politics well, but that poor man that died in Minnesota, right? There's police brutality everywhere in the world. Okay, it's not like El Salvador's perfect about that. I'm sure there is, and if there is, then it should not be impugned. It should be persecuted, and so. But for the most part, the majority of those people that are in jail, they're people who deserve to be in jail right now.
Yeah, and I hear you. And I mean, it seems like too, like there are some detractors, but for the most part, it seems pretty positive. Like we even had, Bukele get on Tucker Carlson and Fox News in the United States, and Tucker was kind of going in on, the current, I guess, issues in the United States and cities like Baltimore and some of these others that are, very crime-ridden cities, and saying like, maybe we should take notes out of what El Salvador is doing because of how successful they've been at, getting crime off the streets and kind of making that country safer. And so, although there are some detractors, it does seem, like overall, outside of even just the Bitcoin space, he's done a very good job with El Salvador. And, it like you said, I think at a certain point, you got to say enough is enough, and the current system isn't working. So you have to kind of find a way to, make it work and bring down crime. And it's been successful. You can't argue with the results, right? So, I mean, I think for the people of El Salvador, he got a lot of popularity internationally with Bitcoin becoming legal tender, but I think overall he's just making El Salvador a better place for people for the El Salvadorians and for people to even come and visit. I mean, we're seeing tourism skyrocket and everything else too. So, I hope these measures continue, and I'm very bullish on El Salvador going forward. And I mean, just what do you think of, I guess, the overall exposure he's getting as well? Because now we're not only getting, Bukele on Tucker Carlson, we're getting, I believe Kamala Harris even said some negative things about him as well. So, I mean, before it was one of those things where you'd never really talk about El Salvador, but now it seems like everybody has somewhat of an opinion on El Salvador and their politics and what everything's going on down there.
Yeah, I mean, and and if we just maybe rewind a little bit back to Bitcoin and just like a positive business environment, if you are a Bitcoin company wanting to be in the only country where Bitcoin is truly one of the legal tenders in the country, and not like some of these other fake Bitcoin republics, right? Then you want to know that, and you do your traditional enviro scan of the country. You're going to take all the pros and cons. You're going to look at, okay, well, hurricane season's a bit iffy. So if I set up, I want an office, that's not exposed to that. There's earthquakes. Maybe there's some infrastructure issues with running water or reliable electricity. So, and then you're like, okay, I can live with all that, and then the pros are like, oh, good weather, quality of life. And then you think, well, oh, really, is that the whole story? Because like over in the cons, there's crime, high criminality. And then I'm like, maybe I don't want to invest in that country. Like it may, like that's a big deterrent, right? So you have to address that issue in order to make a positive business environment for people to come in, right? And like the other thing is like the mood of the country, culture, thinking positively about it. Like it's the place to be, it's the place to like there's a good vibe there, right? People feel proud to be there, right? And pretty soon, like what happens is like even the people who are like crime was the easy thing, the better incentive, because that's how I could earn money. Now that's no longer possible because criminality is severely punished, okay? Not freedoms, criminality, okay? And you have a booming and thriving economy, which, now you can be like, well, like, hey, I could be a tour guide. I could take people around the country. Like, there's more than just El Zonte, okay? Like, there's like beautiful beaches that are virgin, unexplored. I could like go and like, not everybody's going to have a big budget. You can focus on a niche market of like backpackers and campers and camp by the beach. Now there's an opportunity for young people to become entrepreneurs, to think outside the box, where the incentive of actually earning money, having tips, getting loyal clients, and building your business is a lot better than the incentive of living in criminality and earning your keep that way, right? And so like when we think about the business environment, it's a must. You like it's a must address, right? And so what Bukele is doing and the exposure that he's showing and some of the things that he's getting criticizing for, he's basically saying to them, look, let us do our thing, okay? Like if you're one of these 21 presidents who wrote a letter against what Bukele is doing, just think back about the stuff that you did when you were president of your country and how many people suffered, okay? How much money you ransack out of those countries, okay? And and I would say that if you're like somebody like Kamala Harris too, um like are there not enough issues in the US that you're gonna go tell the smallest country in the in Central America how to run their own affairs? Like give them a respite of maybe 20 years without meddling in their internal affairs and then check back. Maybe you can learn some lessons, or maybe it's the evidence that you need to go and intervene, right?
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it's interesting. It's like the smallest country in Central America, and for some reason now it's a point of topic, and that must mean like they're scared of the development or something along those lines. And I mean, like you said, the United States has their own issues. I mean, we just raised interest rates again, 75 basis points, and it seems like they're going to keep aggressively raising interest rates to try to, quote unquote, combat inflation, and they're not going to stop until it's finished. And it's killing all these other fiat currencies and killing all these other nations who are dealing with a lot of these issues when they were using the dollar as their nation's currency. So El Salvador is a perfect example, right? So they were using the dollar before they made Bitcoin legal tender. Obviously the dollar is still legal tender there as well, but I mean, there was massive amounts of stimulus, massive amounts of loans giving out to businesses in America, but countries like El Salvador, who are using the dollar, don't face any of the benefits. They only get all the negatives. And so it's continuing policies like that is just going to keep those countries down. And I think overall, Bukele is doing a lot of positives for El Salvador, and I can't say it enough. I mean, I think like he's got it on the right track, and I hope to continue to see a lot of this development. We saw he's investing a lot into El Zante Bitcoin Beach to kind of help with that infrastructure and development. And yeah, like you
Yes.
said, I bet there's a ton more too to kind of do that, to kind of develop that country as well. And so, yeah, I mean, hopefully all the investments and everything, people bringing businesses over to El Salvador as well, I think is super encouraged. I know I spoke to somebody here at a Tampa Bitcoin meetup, who went down to El Salvador, and they're considering moving their business down there as well, because if you're a business that's in El Salvador, but you conduct business elsewhere, so if you have like a business that's kind of like remote or something, you don't pay any business tax. But if you have a business in El Salvador and of course conduct business within El Salvador, you pay some taxes. So I mean, they're making it or they're bringing a lot of incentives to drive businesses there. And I think just overall, Bitcoiners are just going to kind of flock there, right? I mean, we saw a lot of moving with your feet in the United States with a lot of these policies for the past couple of years. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more people kind of flock to El Salvador. Are you kind of seeing that, like a lot of people that or maybe in the Bitcoin space kind of starting to flock there, and businesses kind of coming down there just because of the job that Bukele is doing?
100%. I know of at least two people who have bought properties, vacation properties down there, and they hopefully they have the hopes to making it permanent. I know a lot of people who are there. I know a lot of people who were there and plan to be there. So these people weren't going down there before. This is additional money that they're injecting into the economy. I know we're running up against time here, but I just want to sort of leave you with a few things that just to look for. If Bukele he's announced that he will, but in order to seek a candidacy, he has to be able to register himself with the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, and he has to do that 6 months before the next term. So look for some sort of not resignation, but some sort of permit or exoneration for him to leave the presidency to run. Also look to see who his running mate is, because they'll be stepping down from their duties a year before the new term begins. So if it's one of the people in the assembly, they'll be stepping down before. If it's his running mate, the vice president, then they'll both be stepping down at the same time. And then El Salvador will have a new president for 6 months that is not either the current president or the vice president. So, just so that you guys aren't surprised when you're like, Bukele is no longer the president, that's probably going to happen, right? And yeah, like that, those are things to sort of be aware and that are going to happen. Look for it not to be easy. There's probably going to be a time where it's probably going to be almost impossible, and it looks like he may not actually get to run, because despite what people think, everything is against him right now.
Now we have a question from the Canadian Bitcoiners in the crowd. Is it expected that the VP may run in place or kind of take that role? Or do you think that he's going to kind of, do exactly like you described, kind of resign as well, to run with Bukele potentially again?
Yeah, we don't know that. And I don't think that that we'll know that until that happens. I imagine he probably has in mind who will be his running mate. Some people speculate. What is her name? She's a brilliant lady. She's the vice president of the Legislative Assembly. I think Suesi Callejas, I think her name is. She's very very good person, very capable person. So some people speculate that she might be it, or Milena Mayorga, who's the ambassador to the U.S., would be a good running mate, but we really don't know.
Gotcha. Well, Jaime, you've been very generous with your time, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing the knowledge of everything going on in El Salvador with not only just the Bitcoin policy, but with everything. And with that, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you got going on?
Yeah, I mean, like my main gig's still my full-time job. So like I do this for fun. And so you can find me on Twitter, Jaime W. Garcia handle. And yeah, in Bitcoin Magazine, if you just search my name, there should be a handful of articles for you to read. I think they all remain super relevant with everything that's going on. And I would just maybe finish off by saying that I still encourage everybody, including all Salvadorians, to put a little bit of your stack away, put it on a cold storage, self custody. Don't leave it on the exchanges. Make sure you have full custody. And if you don't know how to do that, dive in. There's plenty of research both in English and Spanish. And so that's the only true way, because at the end of the day, yeah, Bukele might be the a good person for the country right now, but if it's not him, or if it's somebody else, or even if he turns sour, you still need to be able to have your money in your custody, right? So
yeah, amen to that. That's a great point. And Jaime's Twitter and his latest article and his link on Bitcoin Magazine is all going to be in the show notes. So be sure to check it out there. And yeah, give him a follow on Twitter. He does great spaces, both in English and Spanish. I know you jump into, my space every now and then as well. So I always appreciate that. So I look forward to connecting with you more in the future. And yeah, maybe we'll have you back on after Bukele maybe does his resignation or something along those lines.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brandon.